When I was sitting in the taxi, my phone's video emitted a soft moan. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and smirked. "Which site did you get that spicy video from? That sound is really getting to me, buddy. Mind sharing the website?" Hearing this, I lifted my head and replied, "That's my living room surveillance." The driver stiffened and turned away, not daring to speak to me again. I chuckled softly and returned my gaze to the surveillance footage on my phone. If it weren't for my desire to surprise Victoria, I wouldn't have decided to cut my business trip short, and thus wouldn't have checked the home surveillance to confirm if she was home. In the video, Victoria was smiling in satisfaction, and the man with her was working hard, seemingly eager to please her. After a while, the driver cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "Sir, we've arrived at your destination." I ignored his probing look and got out of the car, moving like a zombie, lost and desolate, until I reached my doorstep. I raised my hand to knock on the door but let it fall midway. It was laughable that I had to knock at my own house. I pulled out my phone and called the company chairman. I said, "I've made up my mind. I'm willing to manage the overseas branch." Hearing this, the hearty laugh on the other end of the line echoed. "Ha ha, I'm glad you came around. But this will be tough on your fiancée. I heard you two are getting married soon." I smiled and exchanged pleasantries before hanging up. Marriage? Forget it. At that moment, the door opened from the inside. Victoria saw me and was visibly shocked, instinctively shielding Ethan behind her. "Sebastian, why are you back?" she asked. Meeting her surprised face, I replied calmly, "The business trip went well. I finished early and came back." Though my words were directed at Victoria, my eyes never left Ethan's face. Ethan, feeling uneasy under my stare, adjusted his collar, trying to cover the love bites on his neck. Before I could say anything, Victoria, with a forced smile, introduced Ethan. "This is Ethan, my distant cousin. He's new in town and had no place to stay, so I brought him here." Ethan extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. Victoria always talks about you. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." I looked at his hand and coldly brushed it aside. Victoria frowned. "Sebastian, what are you doing? Ethan is my cousin. Be polite." Internally, I scoffed, cousin playing an illicit game. I couldn't understand how Victoria fell for this man so quickly in just 2 weeks. I wanted to know why, so I didn't expose them. Feeling my hostility, Ethan awkwardly withdrew his hand, pulled Victoria and said, "Let's grab a meal. Thank you for taking care of her." Watching their backs, my feelings were complicated. If it were before, Victoria would have hugged me tightly when I got home, clinging to me. But now, her eyes were only on Ethan, not even glancing at me. I followed them silently to a restaurant. Ethan looked at Victoria with affection. "The usual?" Victoria nodded, ignoring me, and they ordered as if they were longtime lovers. Ethan then looked at me with a triumphant smirk. I ordered all Victoria's favorites. "Hope you don't mind." I forced a smile. "Of course not. I always order her favorites too." To my surprise, Ethan only ordered beef dishes. As the waiter brought the food, they complimented. "You two look great together. You must be a couple." Ethan, pleased, handed over some dollar bills. "Thank you. This is your tip." The waiter's eyes lit up, smiling broadly and thanking them before leaving. Victoria blushed but didn't deny it. I stared at her, my eyes boring into her. "Can't you deny it?" Victoria looked up, annoyed. "Do I have to correct everyone?" Seeing her upset, Ethan quickly comforted her. "Don't get angry. It's not worth it." When the food was served, Ethan gave Victoria a piece of beef. "Eat more. You're too thin." Then he put another piece in my bowl. He squinted his eyes slightly and said calmly, "You should eat more too, to thank you for taking care of Victoria." In just half a month, they had become so familiar with each other that Ethan's every move made me feel like the guest. Victoria said, "Sebastian, this beef is really good. You should try it." Her eyes sparkled as she urged me to eat. I put down my chopsticks, memories of the past years flashing through my mind. The first time I met Victoria was in the hospital. I had an allergic reaction to beef and was rushed to the hospital by a passerby. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Victoria in the next bed. Her face was pale and her head was covered in bandages, but her beauty was still evident. I fell in love with her at first sight. From then on, I tried every way to get close to her. The nurses told me that Victoria had been in a car accident and lost all her memories. She didn't know who she was or what she did. She was like a blank slate. Knowing this, I immediately sought help from the police to find her name and background. She was an orphan who grew up in a welfare home. After reaching adulthood, she left the welfare home to find her first job but met with misfortune. I felt sorry for her and offered her a job as my secretary. Victoria had no place to live, so I cleaned out a room in my house for her. Over time, she fell in love with me, and we officially got together. In love for 5 years, I treated Victoria better and better, almost fulfilling her every wish. She loved traveling, so I made time to accompany her. She loved baking, so I paid for her classes and bought her all the necessary tools. She loved wearing dresses, so I cleared out a room in my house just for her clothes. No matter how busy I was, I would take a day off every week to spend with her, giving her little romantic surprises. Our relationship grew stronger, and we were already discussing marriage. Although Victoria had agreed to marry me, I still wanted to give her a romantic proposal. So I ended my business trip early to surprise her. But now, Ethan's appearance shattered everything. When he was around, Victoria didn't even look at me. Seeing me hesitate to eat, Victoria frowned and urged, "What are you waiting for? Eat!" Her voice pulled me back from my memories. I looked at the beef in my bowl, feeling a wave of nausea. I replied, "I'm allergic to beef." Hearing this, Victoria covered her mouth and laughed. She pointed at me and mocked, "You're allergic to beef? We've been together for 5 years, and I didn't know that." She laughed so hard that she fell into Ethan's arms. I sneered inwardly. So she still remembered she was my girlfriend. I thought she might have been possessed or lost her memory again, but she hadn't, and she didn't plan to confess her affair with Ethan. After dinner, Victoria thoughtfully picked up a napkin and wiped Ethan's mouth. Sitting across from them, I clenched my hand under the table. On the way back, Victoria happily held Ethan's hand, smiling brightly. Halfway home, she turned to me and said, "Sebastian, let's set our wedding date for next Monday. If we wait any longer, Ethan will have to leave." Her tone was not a suggestion, but a notification. I nodded calmly and replied, "Okay." For me, the wedding date didn't matter because I no longer wanted to marry her. I had no interest in marrying a woman who had betrayed me. Back home, I walked to my room and found that all the things on the shelf were gone. I turned and asked, "Who moved my things?" Ethan walked up to me slowly and said, "Why are you so angry? You'll scare Victoria. I just didn't like those decorations and packed them away. They weren't worth much anyway. Is it necessary to be so mad? And you're a grown man with embroidered fans in your room. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at?" Ethan looked at me with disdain and a hint of mockery. Seeing him admit it, I was furious. Before he could react, I swung my arm and punched him in the face. Victoria happened to pass by and, seeing this, hurriedly supported Ethan, asking worriedly, "Ethan, are you okay? Does it hurt?" The next second she yelled at me, "Sebastian, what's wrong with you? It's just some things. Do you have to hit him?" Hearing her question, I was mentally prepared, but seeing her firmly defend Ethan, my anger turned to hatred. I pointed at Ethan and shouted, "Those things were my parents' keepsakes. How dare you throw them away?" Victoria, busy comforting Ethan, heard this and looked up, guilt flashing in her eyes. She avoided my gaze, not daring to look at me, but I didn't intend to let her go. I stared at her and said, "You know what those things mean to me. Your so-called cousin dared to touch my things, hitting him as light." My voice grew louder, scaring Victoria into trembling. She remembered I had told her that the embroidered fans in my room were my mother's last works. My mother was a master of intangible cultural heritage. During a trip to learn embroidery techniques, she was caught in a landslide and buried in the mountains. My father couldn't bear the loss of his beloved and died of grief shortly after. In just 1 month, I lost both parents without even seeing them one last time. During that time, I was on a business trip. My dad, fearing for my safety, didn't tell me about my mom's accident. It wasn't until my dad passed away that I got a call from the hospital. This has always been a thorn in my heart. I was depressed for a long time until Victoria gradually helped me out of it. Victoria felt a pang of guilt and was about to apologize on Ethan's behalf when Ethan quickly said, "Sorry, I didn't know those items were so meaningful. How about I buy a few identical fans to replace them?" Hearing this, I shoved Victoria aside and punched him again. I gritted my teeth. "How about I break your arm and give you a prosthetic?" Seeing me hit Ethan again, Victoria's last bit of guilt vanished, replaced by irritation. She frowned and snapped, "It's just some objects. They've been thrown out. What more do you want? Besides, he already apologized. You're being too much." Watching Victoria defend Ethan, I found it laughable. The person who once gently helped me through my darkest times was now standing with someone else, accusing me. I said nothing more and turned to leave. As I walked away, Ethan tugged on Victoria's sleeve and asked pitifully, "Why did he leave? Doesn't he want me here?" Victoria gently patted his back and said softly, "It's okay. He's just jealous. Give him a day or two, he'll be fine." This isn't the first time he's acted like this. I used to pamper her. As the CEO of a listed company, I once spent an hour in a frog costume in scorching weather just to surprise her. Whenever we had disagreements, she never had to apologize. I would cool off for a couple of days and then come back, showering her with gifts and affection. But this time, Victoria miscalculated. Maybe she thought I would forgive her no matter what. After leaving, I went straight to the office. It was the off-season, and there wasn't much work. When Kelly, my assistant, saw me still in the office at the end of the day, she was surprised. "Sebastian, aren't you usually eager to get home to your girlfriend by this time? Why are you still here?" I looked up from a pile of documents and forced a smile. "I have some work to finish. You go ahead." Kelly left, guessing we might have had a fight. After everyone had left, I finally relaxed and pushed the files aside, laying my head on the desk to sleep. For several days, I didn't go home, which made Victoria anxious. She feared I was truly angry this time and called to give me an out. "Sebastian, our wedding is next Monday, just 5 days away. Let's go pick out the wedding dress tomorrow." Hearing this, my eyes lit up. Since Victoria gave me such a green hat, I should prepare a gift for her, making her the most noticeable bride. I agreed readily, already planning my next steps for revenge. Victoria was overjoyed to hear my agreement. When Ethan saw her happiness, he asked, "What made my Victoria so happy?" He wrapped his arm around her waist and she replied smugly, "I thought he'd hold out longer, but he agreed to pick out the wedding dress with me. I knew he loves me deeply." Ethan patted her head and praised, "My Victoria is so beautiful, it's only natural men would fall for you." The next day, I went to the bridal shop early. When I arrived, I saw Ethan in a suit, zipping up Victoria's dress. With her hair cascading over her white shoulders, they looked like models in a magazine. The photographer couldn't help but snap a photo and handed it to them, complimenting, "You two are the most perfect couple I've seen recently. A gift for your wedding." Victoria took the photo and laughed while Ethan smiled happily. I suddenly spoke up, "I didn't know you two were the couple." Hands in my pockets, my voice carried a hint of anger. Victoria looked up, annoyed. "Why are you jealous? You were late and now you're being sarcastic." The staff, used to such drama, quietly left the room. Ethan, holding Victoria's waist, looked at me provocatively. "With your behavior, I can't trust Victoria with you." I chuckled coldly. "Really? Then why don't you two get married instead?" The scheduled time was 6 and I had arrived by 5:30, yet I was still blamed for being late. After speaking, I turned to leave. But the next moment, Victoria, hearing I wanted to call off the wedding, panicked. She lifted her wedding dress and ran to me. "Don't be so petty. My cousin worries about my future happiness and targets you. Instead of showing your best side, you're giving us attitude. Do you think that's right?" Hearing this, I narrowed my eyes. The surveillance footage from that day flashed in my mind, so clear that I could see the sweat on Victoria's face. Her words were utterly absurd. I stared at her for a long moment and finally asked, "Do you love me?" "Of course I do," she replied without hesitation. "But whether it's emotional or physical betrayal, both are unforgivable to me. If her heart is still with me but her body has already betrayed me, it only disgusts me more. Sebastian, we've been together for 5 years. How can you doubt me?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and she clung to my arm, pleading for me not to leave. "We promised to choose the wedding dress together. I want to marry you in a dress you picked." Hearing this, I suddenly smiled. If she so desperately wants to marry me, I'll give her an unforgettable wedding. Looking around, I spotted the shop's most prized dress. "This one. Only the most expensive dress matches you," I said. I called the staff and quickly paid. Soon the dress was handed to Victoria, who joyfully went to the fitting room. At that moment, Ethan slowly approached me, arms crossed, smirking. "Can't you see? Victoria loves me. You should step aside." I couldn't help but laugh. "So what? She's marrying me." Ethan's face darkened. "Don't be too happy. You haven't married yet. Victoria will be mine," I replied calmly and walked away. Who Victoria ends up marrying doesn't interest me. After leaving the bridal shop, I drove back to the office. In 2 days, I was leaving for an overseas position, and there was much work to be done. The fitting room curtain opened, and Victoria emerged, smiling. "Sebastian, how do I look in this dress?" But her smile faded as she noticed I was gone. "Where's Sebastian?" she asked, frowning. "He left as soon as you went in," Ethan replied softly, his tone mocking. "For all your deep feelings, he said he'd forgive anything, yet here you are, trying on a dress with your cousin. No man can tolerate this. So, how about marrying me in 2 days? Victoria slapped him. "Ethan, stop. No matter what happened before, I love Sebastian now." She returned to the fitting room to change. Ethan, stunned by the slap, smiled slyly. He thought, "You'll be mine someday." The next day, I returned home to get my ID and household registration. Victoria, seeing me, offered, "It's almost noon. What do you want to eat? I'll make it." Feeling my deliberate distance, she became anxious, trying to please me. "There's work at the company. I'll eat out," I replied coldly. Disappointed, Victoria's eyes reflected her worry. Leaning against the wall, Ethan sensed trouble. Sebastian's return was ruining his plans. An hour later, while working at the office, my phone buzzed. Ethan messaged me, "Do you prefer fillers or no sensation?" along with brand names. A minute later, he retracted it. "Oops, sent to the wrong person. Your and Victoria's icons look alike." It was clear he meant to show me, planning to challenge me the next day. I replied with a simple "oh," which unsettled Ethan. "Do you have time tonight? There's something I want to discuss." 7 p.m., the coffee shop downstairs. At 7 p.m., Ethan's coffee remained untouched as he stared at me. "I'll be honest, I'm not Victoria's cousin." I sipped my coffee and nodded. Ethan looked puzzled. "Did you know all along?" I stayed silent, and Ethan continued, "All right, I'll say it. We grew up in the same orphanage and loved each other before she lost her memory." On their 18th birthday, they had planned to start working together, rent a place, and begin their life as a happy couple. Once they reached the legal age, they would get married. But after Victoria went for an interview, Ethan never heard from her again. At that time, they had just entered society and didn't have mobile phones. All Ethan could do was wait in their rented apartment, hoping for her return. He waited for more than half a month, finally accepting that Victoria had left him. He assumed she found him too poor and didn't want to be with him. It took him a long time to move on. Recently, Ethan accidentally found out about Victoria's whereabouts and realized she had amnesia, not that she had abandoned him. "So I'm the intruder here, the one who should step aside," Ethan said. Hearing this, I was shocked. "So you knew each other all along." This explains why their relationship developed so quickly, I thought. I had been curious to find out, but now faced with the truth, I couldn't believe it. After all the years and effort I had invested, I turned out to be the third wheel. Still, something felt off. When Victoria disappeared, why didn't Ethan report it to the police instead of just waiting? I asked bluntly, "So why are you telling me this now?" Ethan saw an opportunity and eagerly said, "If I can prove Victoria still loves me, will you step aside?" His eyes were full of confidence, certain that Victoria still loved him, just waiting for my agreement. I casually glanced at him and nodded. "No problem." Seeing my agreement, Ethan immediately called Victoria. He said, "Victoria, you're marrying Sebastian tomorrow, but I have one last wish. Can you fulfill it?" Victoria paused and asked, "What is it?" Ethan smiled and said softly, "I want to hear you say you love me one more time." After a brief silence, Victoria's voice came through the phone. "I love you." Satisfied, Ethan blew a kiss into the phone and hung up, looking at me triumphantly. "Well, you know what to do tomorrow, right?" He left without waiting for my reply. I slowly sipped my coffee, which was slightly bitter without sugar or cream, reflecting on Victoria. She was like the coffee, bitter at first but leaving a lingering sweetness. However, craving that sweetness brought endless bitterness. Today, I finally let go. I had hated Victoria and Ethan, hated myself for being wrong about them, for being so busy with work that I gave Ethan a chance, and for spoiling Victoria to the point she thought I'd always love her no matter what. Back home, Ethan's room was closed, likely already asleep. Victoria emerged from her room with a tailored suit in her hands. "I know you're busy, so I had this suit custom made. You'll look the most handsome groom tomorrow." I took the suit with indifference, muttering a thank you. Victoria rarely showed a caring side, only when she sensed my coldness and wanted to salvage our relationship. "Sebastian," she hesitated, "you'll come to the wedding tomorrow, right?" Women's intuition is sharp. She sensed my feelings for her had faded. Even her efforts for the custom suit only drew a glance from me. Reaching my door, I heard her, I responded without turning back and entered my room. Looking at the suit, perfectly fitting, I tried it on. Victoria remembered my measurements well, showing her internal struggle between her old and new relationships. I decided to make the choice for her. I wrote a farewell letter and placed it under the bedsheet. That night, sleep eluded me as city lights shone outside. Time slipped through my fingers until dawn broke. The wedding proceeded seamlessly. Seeing me in the custom suit, Victoria smiled brightly. She looked stunning, her dress tailored to highlight her figure. Guests admired her beauty in the expensive gown. "This wedding dress is worth $1 million, they exclaimed. Victoria blushed at the compliments. The MC called for the groom, and applause erupted as guests, anticipating my appearance, eagerly looked around. Meanwhile, I had already changed out of the custom suit. I knocked on the best man's room next door and called Ethan out. Seeing me in different clothes, he raised an eyebrow. "Changed your mind?" I sneered, tossing the suit at him. "Congratulations to you both." I turned and left. The car from the company, waiting to take me to the airport, was already at the hotel entrance. Without hesitation, I got in. The midday sun through the window felt like a new beginning. In the hotel lobby, the guests' applause lasted half a minute, but the groom was still missing. The MC, looking awkward, coughed and explained, "Maybe the groom is nervous and didn't hear us." He raised his voice. "Let's give a louder round of applause to welcome the groom." The applause grew louder. On stage, Victoria bit her lip, clutching her dress, feeling a bad premonition. Someone shouted, "He's coming!" Ethan slowly walked up and the applause intensified. "What a perfect match. Such a beautiful bride deserves a handsome groom," the guests exclaimed. Victoria, oblivious to the crowd, looked at Ethan in confusion. "Why are you here? Where's Sebastian?" Her voice, not lowered, was heard by the front row guests and the MC. The experienced MC sensed something was off and didn't proceed. Ethan, lowering his voice, said, "I told him everything. Sebastian wished us well and left." Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief, shaking her head. "Impossible." She lifted her dress and ran out. Outside, she saw me getting into a car. "Sebastian, you promised to marry me. Why are you breaking your word?" she screamed. The car drove away, leaving dust in its wake. She kicked off her heels and chased after it, shouting, "Sebastian, I love you. Come back." The busy city street outside the hotel was filled with traffic. In the soundproof car, I didn't hear or see Victoria chasing. Exhausted from the previous night, I fastened my seatbelt and closed my eyes to rest. In the rearview mirror, Victoria stopped at an intersection, only to be hit by an oncoming car, blood pooling around her. Ethan, arriving, shouted, "Victoria!" She was rushed to the hospital, her white wedding dress stained red. Outside the emergency room, Ethan pleaded, "Doctor, please save her." The doctor responded politely, "We'll do our best." When the surgery light went off, the doctor, sweating, came out. Ethan, waiting anxiously, asked, "How is she?" The doctor, removing his mask, said, "She's out of danger for now, but there's a risk of concussion." Ethan sighed in relief. "As long as she's okay." Transferred to a regular ward, Victoria lay on the white bed, feeling like she had a long dream. In the dream, she lived in a place with many children. She was always cute, and the other kids loved playing with her, except one. He was 3 years older, always bullying her, stealing her food, pulling her hair, and taking her snacks. This continued until Ethan grew up and left the orphanage. Victoria had 3 peaceful years until she turned 18 and had to enter society. On the day of her interview, Ethan appeared leering, "Victoria, you're 18 and beautiful. I've waited 3 years for you." He started to grope her, and she ran, only to be hit by a car. Waking up in the hospital, she had no memory of her past. A kind brother in the same ward helped her recover and find her identity. She was an orphan, with no family to love her. Feeling sorry for her, I gave her a job and pursued her relentlessly. Gradually, she fell for me, and we were together for 5 years. Before my business trip, I proposed, and she agreed. But 2 days after I left, Ethan appeared at her door, calling her name and hugging her. He told her they had grown up together in the orphanage, deeply in love, living together until she disappeared one day. He thought Victoria had abandoned him and searched for her for 5 years. Victoria initially didn't believe him, but the orphanage and names matched, so she had to believe it. However, she already had a boyfriend and tried to convince Ethan to leave. Ethan refused, demanding she spend one more night with him, threatening to show Sebastian their old videos if she didn't comply. To keep Sebastian from finding out, she gave in. But even after several days, Ethan showed no intention of leaving. He insisted that unless she proved Sebastian loved her more than he did, he wouldn't let go. Desperate to end things with Ethan, Victoria agreed. To prove my love, she repeatedly tested me, confident I wouldn't give up on her. But things didn't go as planned. I left the wedding, and Victoria, trying to chase me, got into an accident. Remembering everything, Victoria cried, hating Ethan for causing her amnesia and ruining her happiness. When Ethan returned with porridge, he smiled. "Victoria, it's not that I don't want to give you good food. The doctor said you need to eat porridge for a few days." He set up a small table, blew on a spoonful of porridge, and brought it to her lips. Victoria, looking at her enemy, held back tears. Ethan asked, "What's wrong?" Seeing her tears, he wiped them away. Still sad about Sebastian? I told you, he doesn't love you as much as you think. Victoria glared at Ethan, turning her head away. I remember everything. Ethan's hand shook, spilling some porridge. His expression cracked and he stammered, You know everything? Victoria's cold demeanor confirmed it. She remembered his bullying and deceit. Ethan quickly regained composure. Well, no need to pretend anymore. You're mine now. You have no choice but to marry me. Victoria, unable to contain her anger, raised her hand to slap him, but Ethan grabbed it. Victoria, can't you see? Sebastian doesn't want you. You're mine, he said, his confidence like a thorn in her heart, reminding her she drove away the one she loved. Victoria cried, No, I love him, only him. Her loud cries attracted onlookers and Ethan snapped, What are you looking at? Never seen a fight. Meanwhile, I had landed on the other side of the Atlantic. Everything at the new company went smoothly, except for meeting a woman named Ava on my way home. She was from my hometown and our encounter was a comical mess. Driving as usual, a woman with a bun suddenly appeared on the road. I braked in time and Ava stood frozen. Two men in black suits shouted, Chase her! Ava snapped out of it, and as I opened the door to check on her, she jumped into my car yelling, Drive! Seeing the men approaching. I quickly drove off. Ava, laughing in the passenger seat, gave me a thumbs up. Nice job. I chuckled. Where do you live? I'll take you home. She pouted. You hit me and won't take responsibility. I'm still hurt. Are you just going to send me home? She squeezed out a few tears and I couldn't help but laugh. I hit you? Ava nodded. My knee still hurts. She clutched her knee, teary-eyed. I frowned, knowing I hadn't hit her. She must have fallen while running from the men. But I didn't call her out, just smiled. All right, I'll take you home. Changing direction, Ava tightened her seatbelt. What are you doing? You're not selling me, are you? I laughed. I suddenly felt like teasing her. Now you're scared? Isn't it a bit late for that? Ava's eyes widened and she clutched her chest, shouting, Are you going to rob me or assault me? Seeing her genuinely frightened, I laughed. All right, I'm just messing with you. Didn't you want sweet and sour ribs? We're heading to the supermarket to get the ingredients. I guessed Ava was probably a rich family's daughter, unhappy with her family's arrangements, and had run away. The two men in black were likely her bodyguards, trying to bring her back without harm. Hearing this, Ava laughed sheepishly, her eyes forming crescents. Sorry, I misunderstood. I chuckled. No worries. I hope you won't mind visiting my humble abode. Ava's heart skipped a beat, and she nervously swallowed. You knew? She wondered how I figured it out, given her plain clothes and unmarked face. I didn't answer, parking the car and heading to the supermarket for ribs and other ingredients. When I returned, Ava was leaning on the car window, tapping the glass out of boredom. Seeing me, she straightened up and waited obediently. Once I got in, she eagerly asked, You're interesting. You just go along with whatever I say. Do you often kidnap innocent girls? I laughed, gesturing for her to leave if she had doubts. If you're unsure, you can get out now. Hearing this, Ava clutched her seatbelt, shaking her head. No, I want to go with you. I was joking. I actually know you. Now it was my turn to be puzzled. I squinted at her, trying to recall where we might have met. Ava laughed. Drive. I'll tell you when we get home. Once home, Ava made herself comfortable on the sofa, watching TV and laughing heartily. Shaking my head, I went to the kitchen to cook. Half an hour later, I brought out a plate of sweet and sour ribs. Smelling the aroma, Ava jumped up. Smells great. I'm not dieting today. I'll have 2 bowls of rice. I looked at her, noting her well-proportioned figure. You don't need to diet, I said. Ava laughed. Thanks. If I ate your cooking every day, I wouldn't be able to diet. It seemed she planned to stay long-term. But as a single man and woman living together, it wasn't good for her reputation. I tried to persuade her to leave after dinner, but it only made her more stubborn. She put down her bowl, still chewing, and said, No, Sebastian, you're heartless to kick me out. I frowned. Brother, I don't remember having a sister. Ava, seeing I had forgotten her, looked at me with a mix of sadness and mischief. You spanked me when we were kids, remember? Her words jogged my memory. Our fathers were old friends, and we often played together while they chatted. Ava was always mischievous, breaking things, including a model plane I spent 3 months building. She nonchalantly said she'd replace it, making me so angry I pushed her against the wall and spanked her, asking if she knew her mistake. Her loud cries brought the adults, and I got a scolding too. Years later, thinking about it still made my backside ache. Ava, seeing my reaction, laughed and playfully punched my arm. Didn't expect me to grow up so pretty, did you? Regret spanking me now. I teased. Regret not hitting harder. Ava, surprised by my response, found me different from her usual suitors. She quickly stepped forward to clear the dishes, saying, "Let me do it. You cooked, so I'll wash. That's the rule for freeloading meals." I watched Ava with amusement as she took over. She was still the same as when she was a child, bold and straightforward, with no ill intentions. Even if she had any schemes, they were written all over her face, like a beautiful but naive person. Ava stayed at my place, sleeping in and finding food in the fridge when she was hungry. In the afternoons, she would message me with her dinner requests. After work, I would buy groceries and cook for her. Our days felt like those of a couple in love. Ava's father, knowing she was with me, relaxed and withdrew the bodyguards. He figured it was better for her to be with someone he knew well rather than some random guy. After all, we were like siblings, and nothing inappropriate would happen. Ava stayed for half a month before her father finally called me, sighing and pleading. "Sebastian, my daughter has always been mischievous. She ran away to avoid the suitors I arranged. We can't take care of her forever. She needs to get married eventually." Understanding his concern, I assured him, "Don't worry, I'll talk to her." But Ava was determined to stay, no matter what I said. She even wanted to take over the household, greeting me every day in various seductive outfits. I remained unfazed, much to her frustration. One day she put her hand on my shoulder and asked, "Do you have some hidden issue? How can you resist someone as beautiful as me?" Raising an eyebrow, I gently grabbed her arm and pinned her against the wall. Ava's eyes widened, and she forgot to breathe, her heartbeat the only sound. Her shy expression reflected in my eyes as I whispered, "Do you still want me to be moved? The consequences might be more than you can handle." Before I finished speaking, Ava kissed me, making my heart skip a beat. I had only meant to tease her, but she was serious. Worried she might regret it, I tried to push her away, but she held on tightly, her eyes dreamy. "I've liked you for a long time. Can we be together?" she asked. Meanwhile, back home, Ethan's true nature was revealed. He no longer pretended to be affectionate and imprisoned Victoria, forbidding her from leaving or contacting anyone. Her eyes swollen from crying, she asked, "Why? What do you gain from this?" Ethan lit a cigarette, blowing smoke rings as he replied, "Can't you see my feelings for you? Why do you only like him? What's so great about him?" Victoria, confused, remembered Ethan only bullying her and later developing a lustful interest. Where was the love? Ethan touched her face, feeling her tears, and became agitated, pressing the cigarette butt into her shoulder, making her scream in pain. Laughing at her suffering, he gripped her chin and said, "Victoria, you'll only ever be mine. I know Sebastian left you some money. Give it to me." Victoria, stubborn and in pain, remained silent. She had already wronged Sebastian and could only protect his legacy now. Seeing her defiance, Ethan sneered, "Still so stubborn. Fine. Starve here then." After Ethan left, Victoria, having been trapped for half a month, finally saw an opportunity to escape. She rushed to Sebastian's bedroom, tore his bedsheet into strips, and tied them together to make a rope. His room was the only one with a window from which she could escape. Just as she was about to use the makeshift rope, a piece of paper fell to the ground. Seeing my signature, Victoria picked it up, her tears flowing uncontrollably as she read the letter addressed to her. "Victoria, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The 5 years we spent together were the happiest of my life. I love you deeply, and I know your feelings for me were genuine too. However, before your amnesia, you loved someone else. Faced with two true loves, you're caught in a difficult decision. I can see clearly that after Ethan appeared, your love leaned more toward him, so I chose to step aside and let you be happy with him." Victoria's tears blurred Sebastian's name. She quickly folded the letter and put it in her bag, knowing she had to escape first. She climbed down using the sheet rope and reached the police station to report Ethan for illegal confinement. Ethan was detained for 15 days. During this time, Victoria sold the house, transferred the money to her account, and went to Sebastian's former workplace. At the company, the receptionist warmly greeted her, thinking she was there to retrieve something for Sebastian. Victoria asked, "Where is Sebastian?" The receptionist was puzzled. "He went abroad half a month ago. Didn't he tell you?" Victoria made up an excuse, saying she wanted to surprise him for their anniversary and asked for his address. The kind receptionist wrote it down for her. 2 days later, I was at the office when the receptionist informed me someone was looking for me. Thinking it was Ava, I apologized to my business partner and followed the receptionist. To my surprise, I saw Victoria. She smiled and greeted me. "Long time no see." I was stunned, unable to move. After a long silence, I replied, "Long time no see." Victoria, holding back her pain, asked if we could talk. Knowing she needed closure, I agreed and messaged Ava, telling her I couldn't cook dinner that night. Ava playfully replied, asking for a cake as compensation. At the cafe, Victoria couldn't hold back her tears, causing people to stare. I calmly said, "Victoria, if you keep crying, people might think I'm bullying you." She apologized, explaining the difficult time she'd been through. Since I left, I hadn't kept up with domestic events, assuming Victoria and Ethan were happy together. She tearfully told me her memory had returned. My fingers trembled as I asked, "So you're here to thank me for making the right choice?" Victoria, with red eyes, shook her head vehemently, explaining how Ethan deceived us both. Hearing the truth, I was shocked and understood how Ethan had played us. Victoria, still crying, held my hand and asked if we could be together again. My feelings were mixed. Though deeply hurt before, knowing the truth gave me some closure. Now I have a new life with Ava. I was planning to visit her parents in a few days, but then Victoria showed up, bringing up the past. I pulled my hand away, leaned back in my chair, and looked at Victoria seriously. "It's over, Victoria. The past is the past. Let's not dwell on it. I have a girlfriend now and we can't go back." Victoria's eyes widened and she shook her head, crying, "No, it can't be. You loved me so much. How could you fall for someone else so quickly? You must be making excuses to push me away, right?" Her tear-filled eyes stared at me, hoping I'd confirm her suspicion, but I shook my head coldly. "If you have nothing else to say, let's end this here. I have things to do at home." Back home, I was surprised to see a few dishes on the table: braised ribs, cola chicken wings, and meatballs, my favorites. Ava came out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of rice, smiling sweetly. "How do you like it? Aren't you lucky to have a girlfriend like me?" These were dishes she had learned from me. Usually I cooked, so she rarely had the chance to show off her skills. Today she seized the opportunity. Seeing Ava's happy face, I couldn't help but smile. "What are you waiting for? Wash your hands and eat," she said. I quickly washed my hands and sat down to eat. "I didn't know you had such talent," I praised her, eating heartily. Ava, pleased, watched me with satisfaction. Just then there was a polite knock at the door. Ava asked, "Who's knocking? Could it be someone from your company? You've been so busy today." I was puzzled too and went to open the door. My smile froze when I saw Victoria. "Sebastian, aren't you going to invite me in?" she asked with a smile. Seeing me at the door, Ava came over, naturally putting her arm around my shoulder. "Why are you standing at the door? Come in," she said. When Victoria saw Ava, she realized I hadn't lied. Everything I said was true. She looked at me with tearful eyes. "Sebastian, can I talk to her alone?" she asked. Ava, confused, pointed at herself. "Me? We don't even know each other." I was worried Victoria might hurt Ava, but Victoria reassured me, "Don't worry, I won't do anything to her. Besides, this is your home. What are you afraid of?" Her words eased my concerns. After getting Ava's consent, I went to my room, leaving them alone. Victoria stared at Ava as if seeing someone else through her. Ava, puzzled, touched her face. "Is there something on my face?" she asked. Victoria smiled. "No, you're very beautiful. Sebastian is lucky to have you." Ava smiled at the compliment. Victoria continued to watch her, seeing a reflection of her younger self. After a moment, Victoria took out a bank card and placed it in front of Ava. "I'm going back home and might not attend your wedding. This card has some money as a wedding gift. I hope you don't mind," she said, then left despite Ava's calls. Seeing me with someone new felt like a hot coal on Victoria's heart. Even if she didn't want to let go, she couldn't change the fact that I had found someone better. All she could do was wish us well. After Victoria left, I came out of my room. Ava pointed at the bank card and laughed. "Your friend is interesting, giving a wedding gift in advance, and it's a bank card." I looked at the familiar card, squinting slightly. Watching Victoria leave, I sighed. That night, I told Ava everything about my past relationship. Ava was initially incredulous, finding it hard to believe such things happened outside of TV dramas. But after thinking it over, she sighed. "Fate can be cruel. Victoria and you were destined to meet but not to be together." I turned to her, smiling softly. "Don't worry. When I love, my heart is entirely yours." Hearing my promise, Ava smiled sweetly, hugged me, and kissed my cheek. After leaving my place, Victoria didn't immediately return home. Despite saying she would let go, she couldn't bear to leave me. She wanted to see me happy, even if it meant watching from afar. Though she knew it was wrong, she couldn't control her desire. This continued until Ethan found her. Seeing him again made her tremble with fear, worried about what he might do. Ethan, with a smirk, approached her. What's wrong? Don't recognize me after a few days apart? We used to be so close. He lifted her chin, reminiscing. Victoria, on the verge of breaking down, pleaded, Please, let me go. You've already ruined me. What more do you want? Ethan, feigning concern, replied, Why are you crying, Victoria? I love you. You should be happy. Suddenly he had an idea. Still thinking about Sebastian? If you can't forget him, I'll send him our intimate videos. He'll see how happy we are together. He reached to wipe her tears, but she turned away, spitting at him. You're a monster. A complete lunatic. Mentioning Sebastian made Victoria snap. She could endure Ethan's torment, but wouldn't let him harm Sebastian. Ethan, surprised by her defiance, laughed. Still protecting him? Do you think he doesn't know about the videos? He's moved on. Each word shattered Victoria's heart further. Summoning her courage, she grabbed Ethan's collar, shouting, You have no right to say that. You're the reason for all this. If I can't be happy, neither will you. She tried to strangle him, but Ethan easily pushed her away, mocking her. You think he loves you more because he's richer? Or just wait. I'll be richer than him and you'll be mine. Sensing something off in Ethan's eyes, Victoria asked, What are you planning? He didn't answer, just smiled mysteriously and took her away, imprisoning her again. This time, he chose a windowless room, keeping her bound except for bathroom breaks. He even fed her himself, saying, Watch, Victoria. Sebastian's success will crumble in half a month. Victoria, seeing his sinister smile, felt a bad premonition. What are you planning? Don't hurt Sebastian, she warned, but Ethan only smiled. Half a month later, I finished my work and took Ava to visit her parents. I brought gifts, her father's favorite mautai and her mother's bird's nest. Entering their home, I greeted warmly, Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Yu. It's been a while. They welcomed me with smiles. Sebastian, come in. It's been 10 years since we last met. I apologized for not visiting sooner due to work, and they waved it off. Young people should be busy. But why bring such expensive gifts? Their smiles faded when they noticed Ava and I holding hands. Mr. Yu's reaction was the most intense. He exclaimed, What's going on with you two? Ava raised our clasped hands, smiling and saying, We're in love, as you can see. Seeing his daughter's proud expression, Mr. Yu was heartbroken. He had thought that leaving his daughter with me was the safest choice, only to realize that the safest place could also be the most dangerous. Regret filled him, but seeing our affectionate demeanor, he knew separating us would be difficult. Covering my mouth with my right hand, I coughed lightly and said, Mr. and Mrs. Yu, please rest assured. I will take good care of Ava. They exchanged glances. Mrs. Yu, more pragmatic, accepted the situation quickly, appreciating my sincerity and diligence. However, Mr. Yu felt conflicted. He had hoped his beloved daughter would marry a wealthy magnate, not someone with a modest fortune. Just as he was about to object, he saw the joy on Ava's face and couldn't bring himself to speak. Ava, seizing the moment, held her father's hand and said, Dad, I know you wanted the best for me with those suitors, but Sebastian is my happiness. Please accept him. Faced with her plea, Mr. Yu could only sigh and nod reluctantly. After dinner, as Ava and I were preparing to leave, my phone rang. Mr. G, there's an issue at the company. My expression darkened. Ava, concerned, asked, Sebastian, what's wrong? You don't look well. Forcing a smile, I reassured her. It's nothing. Just some work issues I need to handle. I dropped Ava off at home and rushed to the office. Entering my office, I found Ethan sitting casually, looking both relaxed and dangerous. Long time no see, he said. Hands in my pockets, I glared at him. Don't tell me you're here for a chat. Ethan smirked. Of course not. I'm here to make a bet. If I win, you give me everything you own. If I lose, I'll give you $1 billion. Frowning, I doubted Ethan had such money. Even if he did, there was no reason for me to bet. I refused outright. As if expecting this, Ethan upped the stakes. Victoria is with me. If you don't bet, I'll kill her. Losing my temper, I lunged at him. You call this love? Blood trickled from his lips, but he laughed. She only has eyes for you. Now that her memory is back, she won't stay with me. Might as well end it. Realizing he was insane, I asked, What's the bet? Ethan proposed, The bid next week. If your company loses, you lose. If you win, I lose. His sinister smile sent chills down my spine, but confident in my chances, I agreed. That night, I returned home distracted, forgetting even to change my shoes. Ava, checking my forehead for fever, asked, Did something happen at work? I sighed, pulling her into a hug and explaining the situation. Ava frowned, puzzled. Why would Ethan bet on a weaker company? We couldn't find an answer. Meanwhile, a secretary sneaked back into the office, copied my bid documents, and handed them to Ethan. I did what you asked. Let my family go, she pleaded. Ethan, after verifying the documents, promised, after we win tomorrow, your brother will be free. The next morning, I double-checked the bid documents before leaving, noting the intact hair on them. At the bid, I was shocked to see the opposing company present identical documents. Inevitably, we lost, and I was thrown out. Outside, Ethan waited, leaning against the wall. You lost. Time to fulfill your promise. He handed over a transfer agreement, pointing to the signature line. Hands trembling, I took the pen. I've waited so long for this. I'll prove I'm better. Victoria should love me, he gloated. Just as I was about to sign, I snapped the pen in half. I asked, why should I sign? Ethan was speechless, stammering, but we agreed, didn't we? I sighed. No, it was just a joke. Why take it so seriously? Ethan's face turned red, and he lunged at me. Just then, Victoria appeared out of nowhere, pushing Ethan away and tearing up the agreement. Ethan, you're insane. I have all the evidence of your crimes. The police are on their way, she said. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. How did you escape? He asked. He had tied her up securely with no sharp objects around. Victoria smoothed her hair and sneered. You can thank yourself for bringing another person into this mess. Ethan had kidnapped the secretary's brother to force her to help him, not realizing the man was a retired soldier. He easily freed himself and rescued Victoria before reporting to the police. Victoria glanced at me, relieved she made it in time. Ethan, you should turn yourself in. When the police arrive, you won't be able to escape. We have plenty to charge you with, including bribing the secretary and stealing trade secrets, she said, standing protectively in front of me. Ethan, realizing his mistake, laughed bitterly. So you're determined to oppose me? He asked. The sound of approaching sirens confirmed there was no turning back. After handing over all the evidence, Ethan was taken away by the police without resistance. As he left, he smiled at Victoria, but she didn't notice. Her focus was entirely on me. Victoria reached out to touch my face but stopped herself. Taking a deep breath, she said, this time I finally helped you. Her eyes were filled with emotion. I looked away, spotting Ava approaching. Ava, I told you everything was fine. Why are you here? I asked. Ava, understanding the situation, replied calmly, I was worried about you. The atmosphere was tense. Victoria broke the silence, asking Ava if they could talk privately. Ava agreed and they went to a nearby cafe. Once seated, Victoria said bluntly, I can't let go of Sebastian. Can you give him back to me? Her eyes were red and swollen. Ava, feeling a pang of sympathy, gripped her coffee cup tightly. Seeing Ava's reaction, Victoria continued, I'm sure Sebastian told you about me. I came here seeking his forgiveness and hoping to rekindle our relationship. But now he has you. I thought I could let him go, but I can't. I love him and can't live without him. Please, give him back to me. I'll give you anything you want. Ava looked at her steadily, feeling sorry for Victoria, but replied, Feelings can't be forced. If Sebastian still loves you, I can't keep him from you. But if he doesn't, even if I step aside, he won't be with you. Her words deeply affected Victoria, who angrily swept her coffee to the ground, shouting, No! If you leave, Sebastian will come back to me. Ava smiled slightly, raising an eyebrow. Really? She called me over and I, having heard everything, approached. I said, Victoria, our relationship is in the past. When I loved you, I was sincere, and when we parted, I had no regrets. Shaking her head, Victoria cried out, I loved you too. I never wronged you. Why can't we be together again? Seeing her tears, I rubbed my temples and said calmly, Can you honestly say you never wronged me? My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for her to hear. Victoria froze, memories of her intimacy with Ethan flashing in her mind. She lost her confidence, clutching her hair in frustration. But that wasn't my intention. I sighed and continued, Regardless of whether you had amnesia or your state of mind at the time, you betrayed me. That's an undeniable fact. As partners, we should be honest with each other, facing problems together. Instead, you not only betrayed me, but also wronged yourself. Ava stood up, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder, nodding in agreement. Victoria, sniffling, looked at us and understood that we could never go back. She wiped her tears and stood up. But weren't you the one who always forgave me when I made mistakes? Why can't you forgive me this time, even when I admit my wrongs and beg for your forgiveness? Everyone makes mistakes. Can't you forgive me one more time? I promise it will be the last. Realizing I couldn't get through to her, I took Ava's hand, interlocking our fingers, and walked away. The bidding issue could have been resolved without you. Please don't disturb our lives anymore, I said, leaving her behind. After parting with Victoria, Ava and I started planning our wedding. Being in our late 20s and with her family pushing for it, we set a date. I planned an elaborate proposal on the largest cruise ship, with Ava in a dazzling dress surrounded by everyone. I knelt with a custom diamond ring, asking loudly, "Ava, will you marry me?" Overjoyed, she covered her mouth, tears of happiness streaming down her face. She shouted into the sea breeze, "I will!" Her answer was carried to every corner of the ship, and everyone celebrated our love. Below deck, Victoria, holding a wine glass, watched through teary eyes behind her sunglasses. She forced a smile, clinking glasses with a handsome man beside her. Seeing us happy, she realized it was time to find her own happiness. A month later, Ava and I had our wedding abroad. With my parents gone and few close friends, it was a small ceremony. Ava, in a diamond-studded gown, and I, in a suit, stood together like a perfect match. The priest gave his blessings and our guests offered their heartfelt congratulations. Outside the venue, Victoria, dragging her suitcase, heard our vows as she walked to the airport, returning home alone. Departures are always tinged with sadness, and she thought of how I must have felt when I left. Sad but also relieved. Back home, hearing familiar Mandarin, she felt reborn. She rented an apartment and found a job at a nearby supermarket, just making ends meet. Her supervisor, a temperamental woman, would curse her out over the smallest mistakes. Victoria silently endured, thinking how she'd been sheltered like a hothouse flower by Sebastian, never facing hardship. Now she had to learn to weather life's storms alone. Days passed and she gradually adapted to her new life, though she often felt tired and occasionally nauseous. One day she received a call from the police. Ethan wanted to see her. Calmly she replied, "There's no need for us to meet again." On the other end of the line, a raspy voice chuckled, "Victoria, I have some good news for you. You must come." Curious, Victoria went to the prison after work to see Ethan, who had been sentenced to 5 years and had only been in for a few months. Sitting across the glass from a scruffy Ethan, Victoria picked up the phone and asked impatiently, "What is it? Or just say it." Ethan, enjoying her frustration, replied, "Haven't you noticed something off with your body lately?" Victoria frowned, thinking back but finding nothing unusual. She glared at him. "If you don't want to say, I'm leaving." As she moved to hang up, Ethan's eyes widened and he shouted, "Wait, I'll tell you." Victoria put the phone back to her ear. Ethan smirked. "You're pregnant with my child. I told you, you'll always be mine." Victoria felt like she'd been struck by lightning, standing frozen. When she finally reacted, she stood up, demanding, "What did you say? How could I be pregnant with your child?" Ethan laughed, watching her panic. Victoria banged on the glass, demanding an explanation until the guards restrained her. Taking a deep breath, she asked, "Why?" Ethan, still smirking, said, "You were already pregnant when you had the car accident. It's my child. From that moment, I wanted to own you completely. Before that, I just wanted to play and make some money." Victoria's mind exploded with this revelation. After hanging up, she rushed to the hospital for a checkup, which confirmed she was 4 months pregnant. Touching her stomach, she recalled her recent nausea and couldn't deny it. This news was a devastating blow. She had just started to move on from Ethan's abuse and build a new life, only to be dragged back by this pregnancy. She considered aborting the baby, but seeing a woman gently pushing a stroller and singing to her baby changed her mind. The baby in the stroller smiled at Victoria, and the woman, noticing her tears, kindly wiped them away, saying, "I was scared when I was pregnant too, but now my baby brings me so much joy. Look how cute they are." Victoria looked at the baby, who seemed to gaze back at her with understanding. She touched her own stomach, realizing there was an innocent life inside her. Deciding to keep the baby, she resolved to give it a good life. 6 months later, Ava and I returned home. Ava, pregnant, teased me, "I'm just pregnant, not disabled. You don't have to treat me like a princess." Smiling, I helped her off the plane. "You are my princess, and now you're carrying our love. I have to take extra care of you." Ava laughed. "I knew I chose right. All right, since you're so attentive, I'll let you pamper me." I playfully bowed, "Thank you, princess, for the honor." Since becoming pregnant, Ava had become more sentimental, wanting our baby to be born at home. So, I arranged a transfer back. At our new house, Ava, holding her belly, asked for steak. I laughed, "Of course." On our way to get steak, we stopped at a supermarket for water. There I saw Victoria stocking shelves with a baby on her back. The baby slept soundly despite the noise. Victoria glanced up, saw Ava and me, and quickly looked away, pushing her cart in the opposite direction. Our past was behind us and we were on separate paths now. Ava, noticing my distraction, asked, "What were you looking at?" I shook my head. "Nothing. Let's get that steak. You and the baby deserve a treat." Victoria and I had become strangers, and that was for the best.